Hey there, cats and kitties. I am the Blues Man, Johnny Blues, and with this video I'll be discussing my thoughts on Series 9, Episode 5 of Doctor Who, The Girl Who Died. And let me get it right out of the way that, this episode had so many really interesting and awesome aspects to it. But I did notice, for me personally, my excitement for it was slightly diminished from where it's been in episodes previous in Series 9 thus far. If we look at the sort of opening crescendo, if you will, of the two-parter featuring the two monuments in the history of Doctor Who, the Doctor versus Davros, you had the Daleks in there, you had Missy in there, Clara, all of that stuff being inside a Dalek. I mean, I really felt like coming off that first two-parter, nothing is going to equate on the same level of my excitement, at least my personal excitement, with modern Doctor Who and classic Doctor Who. All of that stuff was brought to a head. And I was pleasantly surprised to find, as we get into the second two-parter of Series 9 thus far, the first half of that was resounding. It was right on par. My excitement was right in level with that. And I only noticed just the slightest hint in the second half of the second two-parter, as I say, the underwater aesthetic and the ghosts and the timey-wiminess, the army base, all this kind of stuff, O'Donnell, which was a standout character. My excitement did slightly diminish toward the second half of it. It wasn't quite up there by the end of the episode, and that's very much how I'm left with this episode, and I kind of equate it to certain aspects of modern Doctor Who as well as classic Doctor Who, where there are sometimes in a story, you just have things that either really work for you or don't quite. And this was kind of a hodgepodge of both of those sides of the equation. One of the things that stuck out to me the most was Maisie Williams. I mean, she is very much the most resounding aesthetic of this particular episode. With her character, I was very much drawn to her character. And I find that the importance of her role in this story was tantamount to, whether it was like make it or break it, surrounding her portrayal and her character for me. And I wouldn't have been at all disappointed if any of the fan speculations, as we found out about her casting and we're seeing trailers, if it had turned out that she was like Jenny, the Doctor's daughter, or like Susan or something like that. A lot of the speculations were, could she be a time lady? Why has the Doctor seen her before, seemingly? And as we find out, that was actually, the next episode is where they have their secondary encounter. But I would not have been necessarily disappointed. I wasn't disappointed, even though it played out differently, with sort of more a Captain Jack Harkness kind of flavor toward the end of the episode. And the idea that she is now immortal, and as we see for the teaser for the next episode, the second half of this particular story, following her character, so I almost don't consider it a full-on like two-parter. It's more about her character rather than a continuation of the story, because I'm sure it'll be a completely different environment with different characters and everything like that. It's only really a two-parter in as far as her character being involved goes. But it does seem like through the course of time, through the passage of time, and this immortality she now has blessed upon her or cursed upon her by the Doctor, you do see what seems to be almost a malevolence. It's like the idea of being ever entwined to fate and never being able to, have sort of the blessing of death. All those losses, it seems like it's going to take a toll on her, and there's aspects of that is very enticing to me, because that's something we've seen the Doctor himself battling. He's even talking about it in this episode. So the idea of how relatable as characters they will become, as people they will become, I want to see more of that explored in the second part to do with her character. But there were other things in this episode. I mean, of course, there was some referential stuff going back to the classic series, the reverse the polarity thing. Loved that. Although I thought it was kind of an obvious, shout out. I was kind of miffed the Sonic Shades went bye-bye. That kind of ticked me off. And I loved, actually, the place setting, the time period with the Vikings and Odin and all this kind of stuff. Odin himself actually reminded me heavily of the pirate planet, the sort of main pirate captain from that serial, the Tom Baker serial. And I think that kind of, I can best equate the problems I had with this particular story is very much kind of reminiscent of the problems I had with the Pirate Planet. There were certain aspects that I really loved about the Pirate Planet, and there were certain aspects I really loved about this particular, story. But then there were things that just didn't quite work, felt a little clunky, a little too comedic at times, and that's where I think my resounding excitement started to diminish. There were a lot of funny aspects in this episode, and just, tantamount ones, especially with the Doctor's character and his sort of soul-searching, revisiting that whole Fires of Pompeii thing. Seeing Donna and Ten was just goosebumps, finally having the recognition of why that face was chosen. He wants to be the Doctor. He wants to save people. This is what effectively brings that blessing or curse, that double-edged sword, upon Maisie's character. And all of that was just absolutely insanely awesome, in sort of the history of Doctor Who, both modern and classic, as I say. And but I mean, there were just certain aspects in, like, training this particular group of people once the Vikings have been spirited away and all their man juice, for lack of a better term, has been siphoned by this, pirate captain looking Odin. And the Vikings aspect kind of reminded me of the Time Meddler and some of the goofy aspects of that story, going all the way back to Hartnell's era, the first Doctor era. Love it or hate it. It was kind of a mixed bag where there were elements of both, for me personally, where there were stellar moments, and there were just sort of, I could have done without that moments, But effectively, like, I loved the Doctor. Peter Capaldi is what makes Doctor Who for me, these days anyway. As far as just his performance, his soul searching, his being sort of out of the loop. The baby talk thing was a little ridiculous, but I like that it actually did serve a purpose. And I know there were a lot of complaints sort of ahead of this episode with the sort of, holographic dragon or whatever it was. People were saying it looks kind of ridiculous. And now you actually see by watching the episode, well, it served its purpose, and it was kind of falling in line. If you thought it was a faulty looking, special effect, well, that was the gimmick. That was the purpose. It was not real. It was, the best they could do with what they had to take on the Mire, which, by the way, the armor suit versions of the Mire felt like something right out of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I said that sort of, reacting to one of the teaser trailers, I think, for Series 9, going back a while now. And it just kind of feels like there was some Douglas Adams love back and forth in this one. And again, some love for classic Who and everything like that. The idea that the Doctor, going back to what resounded with Capaldi's portrayal and the Doctor himself, what he's going through, he leaves off with, effectively making Maisie like a time lady, this immortality. It's a blessing and a curse. But there's that hint, once again, calling back on something we've heard a couple of times already in Series 9, the hybridization, the hybrid. Why did he leave Gallifrey? What was that about? Going back on the conversation he has with Davros in the opening two-parter, it seems to suggest that the Time Lords of Gallifrey were trying to create a hybrid between Dalek and Time Lord, effectively. And it at least seems the implications are that's what spurred on the Doctor's leaving. He didn't want to know part of it, or something in the ramifications of that, or in, sort of sideways, to do with it. Something affected him, and he was displeased, and he wanted the hell out of there. It's very telling that he took his one and only granddaughter, Susan, as though he was trying to steal her away from something he felt was threatening, or that he couldn't bear to, see her experience, something like that. Maybe this was something they were trying to put into play for all of, Gallifrey, all the Time Lords and ladies, I don't know. But the fact that we're left off with his mulling that over, what he's now made effectively Maisie's character become, seems to play into that past element. And for that, it's like, I want to learn more. I want to know more about that effectively. I also love, there was this brief moment where, when he finally decides, after this soul searching and after we see Donna and Ten and all this stuff, and we realize why he chose that face, there's this point where he sort of exclaims to the sky, and to all those listening, if you don't agree, to hell with you. Shades of Conan the Barbarian, hell yes. I mean, perfect time period, even though, he was a barbarian, he's not a Viking and everything like that. I just thought that was a blatant sort of homage to that moment. Seeing the Doctor pull that out, the idea of yelling up to Crom, yelling up to the gods, or whatever, benefactors, otherworldly might be out there. To hell with you if you don't agree with what I'm going to be doing. Not quite the Time Lord victorious, but, thankfully, which would be intriguing if we end up having that come into play and everything at some point in the future. And speaking of which, actually, not quite Time Lord victorious, but Companion victorious. Once again, we have this foreshadowing of this idea that Clara's kind of riding off the rails, and the Doctor's taking note of it. He's not very proud of what sort of the transformation, what she's become in her time having been spent traveling through time and space with him. She's very much running into trouble. She's very much, everything's going to be fine. We're going to figure this out. We're going to, you're going to come up with a plan. This is just par for the course, even though we do see when she's sort of taken up into Odin's, vessel, whatever you want to call it, she's kind of the one, encountering Odin at first. And then Maisie steps in there and she's like, I'm going to throw down. I'm going to wrestle now. You do see Clara kind of trying to tell her, back off a bit, and that's kind of what the dynamic between the Doctor and Clara is. He's kind of very much trying to express to her what you're doing. You're going to run right into trouble. You may end up running into your own demise. And he feels responsible for it. And now that we know Jenna is tentatively leaving at some point, it really does once again bang on and on and on my questioning how that's going to happen. Somebody was basically talking in the comments of one of my previous episode discussion videos on that very topic, saying maybe it'll be, we find out Clara is actually pregnant, and it's something to do with the Danny Pink lineage, I think it was Orson Pink was like the great-great-grandson or something. And they never explicitly said that was going to be the case, but quite frankly, I would almost be more satisfied her leaving that way, finding that she wants to actually step away from the TARDIS and become a mother or something like that, because of how personally she was affected by the loss of her own mother. I think it would be, something full circle for her character. Whereas if she does run headlong into trouble and she is sort of snuffed out at some point, she ends up dying, it's gonna kind of rub me the wrong way, I gotta admit. The effects that it'll have on the Doctor, it could be compelling, but it could also be irksome, to see him maybe move on too easily, or contrary to that, become that much darker and sort of almost malevolent, I don't know how well that would sit with me. But I mean, largely, by and large, this episode, I enjoyed so much of it. It's just, there were certain clunky aspects to it, in the mix. And so while it's not necessarily going to be high on my list, out of the best episodes of Series 9 thus far, and we still have several episodes to go, so I'm going to just assume that there's probably going to be episodes that's, get me excited as much as the first 4 episodes of the series, whereas this one just faltered a little bit. I know it had Moffat writing as well as another writer and everything, and I kind of felt like you could almost see where the trade-offs were, especially in the interactions with the Doctor and Clara. I think that's all Moffat. I think he's seeding, what the eventuality of her character is going to be in leaving, however that's going to take effect. But yeah, I mean, I did enjoy this episode. By the end of it, I'm not as resounding. I'm not as bouncing off the walls as I was the previous episodes thus far. And but I am penultimately excited for the next episode, because, as I say, that change in effect of Maisie's, character, what she's going to be going through with that immortality, sort of walking as a companion with time. And the idea that she does have that charm, that sort of secondary charm, device, whatever you want to call it, where she can choose someone to spend that time with. I'm wondering who, if we're going to see her make that choice. I kind of hope it's not fire-breathing lion dude. But yeah, I mean, that's pretty much where I'm left with this episode. I did thoroughly enjoy so much of it. It just wasn't quite as, you know, resounding for me personally as the episodes previous in Series 9 thus far. And, you know, Maisie made this episode for me, Peter Capaldi, Jenna. The guy who played Maisie's character's father, actually, I felt was a standout character in the emotion. And, you know, at first he's sort of raging about, you know, what basically trouble the Doctor and Clara are depositing on their town. You know, he's trying to fake them out that he's Odin and everything. Then the real Odin seems to come from the sky. And, you know, this guy's just ticked off. He's like not having what the Doctor's serving. Yo-yo and all, you know, another throwback to the classic. And that was funny. And you do see a sort of transition in his character, especially when you think Maisie's character's dead. That really did affect me emotionally. I thought, hey, this guy was well cast. And so yeah, that's one last footnote, you know, talking about this episode. The Girl Who Died. Can't wait to see where we pick up in the next episode. And I hope we get even more resounding in the Doctor's own sort of soul searching, how he feels about himself. Am I a good man? Why I chose this face was to save people, to be the Doctor, to wear that as my name, not just as a moniker, you know. And the idea that now Maisie's character is going to be so akin to him in her endlessly traversing time, you know, being in step with it, and seeming to take a little bit of a dark turn as a result, you know, as a result of all that loss. I really hope we get into the thick, the meat and potatoes of that aesthetic in those characters and how they rub off each other and everything. And so yeah, that'll be pretty much it for me on this. I'd love to hear from you guys in the comments below what you thought of this episode, if you've seen it, if you enjoyed it, if you can agree with me that, you know, there were aspects of it that were just through the roof and other aspects that weren't quite, or if you just loved it unabashedly, or if it didn't work out for you at all. You know, anything goes in the comments below. Love having the conversation with you guys. And so yeah, that'll be it for me on this. Hope this video finds you well, and I'll catch you all later. Peace.